The overachiever. This is the student who treats every assignment like it determines the rest of their life. They submit work days before the deadline, ask questions that make the teacher pause, and keep a planner that looks like it was designed by an architect. The pressure they carry is real, even if it is self-imposed. A lot of overachievers are not driven purely by love of learning. They're driven by fear of falling short, and that distinction matters more than their grades ever will. They tend to do well on paper, but burnout finds them eventually, usually at the worst possible time. And when it hits, it often hits hard because they have never built the habit of slowing down. Rest feels like a threat to them. Stillness feels like falling behind. So they keep moving until something forces them to stop, and by then the cost is usually higher than it needed to be. The last-minute worker. Everything this student produces comes from a window of 2 to 4 hours the night before it is due. The strange thing is, it sometimes works. Adrenaline has a way of sharpening focus that a relaxed afternoon simply cannot replicate. Teachers often assume these students are lazy, but that is not always the full picture. Some of them genuinely cannot engage with a task until the deadline makes it feel real. The problem is consistency. A method that works for a short essay tends to collapse under the weight of a final exam or a long-term project with no single panic point to activate them. Eventually, the system runs out of room to absorb the risk. The stakes get higher, the material gets denser, and the 2-hour window that once saved them simply stops being enough. What worked at 14 tends to break down at 24. The quiet one. They sit near the back or the side, contribute little out loud, and are often forgotten in any conversation about classroom dynamics. What teachers and classmates miss is that quiet students are frequently processing everything. They listen more carefully than most, form their own opinions, and often produce written work that is more thoughtful than anyone expected. The classroom rewards performance and visibility, which puts them at a structural disadvantage that has nothing to do with their actual ability. Some of the most capable students ever to sit in a classroom left almost no impression on the people around them. The grade was there, the recognition rarely was. Over time, being overlooked can become something a quiet student internalizes as a verdict on their worth, rather than a flaw in how the room was run. That is a difficult thing to unlearn, and most of them carry some version of it long after school ends. The class clown. Disruption is their medium. They read the room faster than most adults can and use humor to manage the social temperature of a space they often feel uncomfortable in. Behind the jokes, there is usually a student who is bored, anxious, or looking for a form of recognition that grades are not giving them. Teachers who write them off entirely tend to lose them completely. The ones who find a way to channel that energy, giving them a role, a responsibility, something to be good at, often discover a student who was performing because nothing else had asked anything of them. Give them a real audience, and the behavior usually shifts. The need underneath the disruption was never really about the disruption itself. It was about being seen, being useful, mattering in some concrete way to the people in the room. That need does not go away on its own. The chronic absentee. This student misses class regularly, falls behind on material, and often appears indifferent when they do show up. The surface reads as disengagement, but the reasons underneath vary enormously. Family responsibilities, health issues, a home environment that makes rest impossible, work shifts that run into the school day. Absenteeism is one of the clearest signals that something in a student's life outside the classroom is making the classroom hard to reach. Treating it as a discipline problem rather than a symptom tends to make everything worse and rarely gets anyone back through the door. The student who feels punished for circumstances they did not choose stops trying to explain them. After a certain point, they stop showing up altogether, not out of apathy, but because the gap has grown wide enough that returning feels more humiliating than staying away. That is the moment the system tends to lose them for good.
The people pleaser. They agree with the teacher, volunteer for group tasks nobody wants, and avoid conflict at almost any cost. Their work is reliable and their behavior is easy to manage, which means they rarely draw attention or concern. The difficulty is internal. People-pleasing students often have no clear sense at what they actually think because they have spent so long figuring out what others want to hear. They can move through years of school, receiving consistent praise without ever developing the capacity to hold a position under pressure or disagree with someone they respect. That gap tends to surface at the worst possible moment, usually when it actually matters. A job interview, a difficult relationship, a situation that requires them to say no clearly and mean it. The years of approval they collected turn out to offer very little guidance for moments that require them to stand alone. Learning that lesson late is harder than it sounds. The natural talent. Some students absorb material without visible effort and perform well without the habits that normally produce performance. Teachers notice them early. Peers find them effortlessly impressive. The risk is that natural ability tends to go untested for years, which means these students often reach a point where effort is genuinely required and have no idea how to produce it. Talent that has never been stretched rarely survives contact with real difficulty. The students who coasted through school on ability alone often struggle the moment the environment stops rewarding what comes easily and starts demanding what does not. By that point, the gap in their preparation is significant. They were never taught how to sit with confusion, how to fail at something and return to it, how to work through a problem that does not yield quickly. Those are learnable skills, but they require difficulty to develop, and difficulty is exactly what was never asked of them. The grinder. Raw ability may not be their strongest suit, but they make up for it in hours. They reread chapters, redo practice problems, and stay after class to ask questions that were already answered because they want to be certain. Progress for them is slow and visible in a way that can feel humbling, but consistency compounds. Over the course of a full academic career, grinders tend to develop work habits that outlast any advantage raw talent provides. The effort itself becomes a skill, and that particular skill transfers to almost every environment they will ever enter. Most people who have achieved something lasting were grinders, even if nobody called them that at the time. They were simply the ones who kept showing up after the people with more natural ability had decided the effort was no longer worth it. There is a quiet kind of confidence that builds in a person who knows they can outwork almost anyone in the room. It does not announce itself, but it holds. The social hub. Every class has one student whose real area of expertise is other people. They know who is struggling, who is dating whom, who fell out with whom last week, and how to move between social groups without losing standing in any of them. Academic performance varies, but their emotional intelligence is often well ahead of their peers. Schools rarely find a formal way to value this. The ability to read people, manage relationships, and hold a group together is treated as a personality trait rather than a developed capacity. In most professional environments, it turns out to be worth quite a lot. The student nobody thought would go far often ends up leading the room. What looked like socializing was actually years of practice in negotiation, conflict resolution, and reading unspoken dynamics. Those skills were being built in real time, just not in any classroom that gave grades for them. The invisible middle. They pass, they show up, they complete the work, cause no disruption, and receive no particular attention in either direction. Teachers remember the students who struggle and the ones who shine. The invisible middle tends to fall through the space between. This is the largest group in any school and the one least likely to be asked how they're doing. Average performance is often just managed potential, and managed potential that receives no investment tends to stay exactly where it is. A single teacher who noticed them at the right moment could have changed the entire trajectory. The tragedy is not that these students failed. It is that many of them never found out what they were actually capable of because nobody thought to find out alongside them. Competence without visibility is one of the quietest forms of waste a school system produces.